Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Raw podcast. Just Phil and James today as we take you through Sunderland's win against Sheffield Wednesday at Hillsborough away from home in the Championship. Phil, we mentioned on the post-match video and as well on the whistle video that it wasn't pretty, but Sunderland got the job done. Two impressive goals though from one Eliezer Mayenda.
Yeah, a little bit of luck with the first one, I think we should say, in a few different aspects. But I think it was probably a performance from Mayenda that just underlined, what we said about him for a while. That stuff seems to happen when he's on the pitch for Sunderland. He's got this really, really happy knack of chipping in with an assist or a goal. He's emerging as a real gem for Sunderland. I mean, if you think that we've spoken for quite a long time about Sunderland not really having a proven striker, all the issues in the final third, all of a sudden now we're in a scenario where obviously Wilson Issidor's form and his performances over the course of the season are there for all to see. And then you've got this 19-year-old kid who, he's getting into, I know he started the other night, but getting into kind of genuine super sub territory, isn't he? And it's a really healthy position to be at. And I think that's one of the main reasons why, even though, as we discussed, and I'm sure we'll chat about now, it wasn't a particularly good Sunderland performance. There were quite a lot of positives to take from it, and that's the main one. I think that you can see that Mayenda's better when he's playing with Isidor, in terms of generally speaking. I think that's a fair comment. I think he really benefits from when Isidor backs into the centre halves and there's a little bit of space for Mayenda and he can turn and carry it towards the edge of the opposition box. He can be such a difficult player to defend against. But we also saw him find out that he is capable of leading the line. He can press. His tactical understanding seems to be really good. And obviously he's got that pace in behind. So I think it's really exciting in the short term. I think also in the long term, you have to give Sunderland a lot of credit for what looks to be an absolute gem of a bit of recruitment, really. And obviously a lot of credit to Mayenda. He's still only 19. And a year on from making this massive move to a completely new division, new country, new language. He's flying, and it's really exciting. I'm loving watching him. I think you just don't know what's going to come next, but he always seems to be involved and makes something happen. I think he's a player I'm really, really, really enjoying watching.
I think he deserves loads of credit for a multitude of different reasons. So obviously, he's come to Sunderland as an 18-year-old, hasn't he? New country, new language, all of that sort of stuff. It hasn't worked for him. I think he only played 8 times in his debut season. He then had that loan move to Hibs. I think he only played a further 4 times across the league and cup. It was a weird move, that, wasn't it? He was playing for Hibs as under-21s. It was a little bit strange. He's come back in the summer. He's kept his head down. By all accounts, his attitude has been fantastic. He started the season, did well, but then he's seen this amazing striker from France come in and he's been rotated in and out. He's had tough moments this season as well, Phil. I mean, the miss against Blackburn Rovers, against Stoke City, it's just a little bit of a reminder, isn't it, that yes, sometimes these moments can be frustrating from young players, but it's best not to write them off because there's talent there, and I think we're seeing that. And I mean, the bond he's got with the crowd at the moment is fantastic as well. Was privileged enough to speak to him after the Sheffield Wednesday game, and he comes across as a really nice, down-to-earth, genuine guy. His English is actually really, really, really good, so that must have improved as well since he first joined the club. So a real success story, Phil, at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the one thing as well is I don't think it's rewriting history now. He's playing well this season to say that it was obvious there was something there last year. Obviously, I think it was his hamstring, wasn't he? He got injured in literally his first training session at the club.
It wasn't quite like Myer levels of bad, was it?
Yeah, and I mean, Myer, obviously, because he was scoring goals in pre-season, that sort of earned his opportunity because as a striker, that's what you're there for. But with Mayenda, obviously, he got that injury in his first training session, which kind of led to this feeling we all had that there was like a striker curse at Sunderland, which maybe now is finally being lifted. But I remember his debut, I think it was against Huddersfield at home. And he had that sort of one where he burst through on goal and crashed the shot, and the keeper knew nothing about it, and it just hit him. But you could see straight away that he was explosive, that he had a really, really powerful shot. There was definitely something there. I'll never be able to get my head around why he went to Hibs, to be honest, in the sense that, like, a few days earlier we'd spoken to Michael Beale, and he said, "Oh no, it's best Mayenda just staying in house, adjusting to the language, adjusting to the playing style." Basically, what someone had done with Alexis this year. And then all of a sudden he was off to Hibs. It felt strange and it didn't really work out. But, the one thing that anyone in football will always tell you that it's not always as simple as if you play well, a loan's a good move. And if you don't play or play badly, a loan's a bad move. Sometimes you can just learn from that maturity, from being away, kind of having to be on your own 2 feet, really. So maybe that's what's happened with Mayenda. But I think the thing you've alluded to there, which I think probably is the main takeaway, obviously he's got great sort of natural ability and natural attributes. It's obviously, though, his attitude that's made all the difference, as you say, the way he's been able to learn the language, the way that, the reason he started the season was because he did what Lebris asked of him. He completely grasped, Lebris wanted to be on the pitch, when he wanted him to press, what the movements he wanted from him. That was why he earned that opportunity, and that is why he kind of jumped to the head of the pack of those kind of young players at the club. So, it's a really, really, really nice blend. And I think, if we zoom out a little bit, one of the things that, we all talked about after Ross Stewart's departure was the lack of strikers at the club and the lack of succession plan and all this kind of stuff. And the response from the club was very much that, they'd inherited a difficult situation where a lot of the club's best young strikers had been sold in the previous era. And, that kind of aggressive recruitment of young strikers last summer was about filling that gap. And now I think you can see the value of that approach because, Sunderland they've paid a relatively significant fee, but in the currency of strikers, a very, very small one. And they've got a player who, potentially could be a massive player for them in the future. And it feels really, really nice. And there's still every chance Sunderland get promoted and all of that. But we're going into a summer. I know there's been a bit of chat about Isidor in the Premier League and stuff, but Sunderland have potentially got 2 top championship strikers contracted for next season. And I'm not writing off the rest of this season, but I actually think that given what we've been through in recent times, that's actually a really positive thing. That there's a bit of feels like there's a bit of stability and a bit of continuity in that key part of the pitch. And I think we are watching the emergence of a really, really strong player for Sunderland, hopefully over a long period of time.
Just looking at Mayenda's game-by-game statistics as well this season, I'd actually forgotten that he missed 6 games, didn't he, after the Middlesbrough win at home? So he was actually out of the team for quite a while. So he's actually bounced back from an injury this season as well. His rise to prominence, though, Phil, does open up a really, really, really interesting debate between 4-3-3 and 4-4-2. We've seen 4-4-2 work for Sunderland this season, particularly Sheffield United at home, in which Mayenda and Isidor starred in that game. Isidor got a goal, Mayenda got a goal, and then Mayenda got an assist for Isidor. It has worked for Sunderland in the past. There are pros and cons. You do lose a little bit in the midfield if you do have 2 up front, which is perhaps why he hasn't opted to do it in big games away from home, reduce the breach, that is. But there's a big clamour for it now because Sunderland, as you say, have 2 really, really good fit strikers firing. Wilson has 13 goal contributions this season. Mayenda's up to 11 as well, which when you consider how much football he's actually played in the minutes is outstanding.
Yeah, it really
Cardiff,
is. Really
Cardiff and Preston at home coming up. Is it time for Lebris to go 4-4-2 and really attack these games with, let's face it, Sunderland not really having much to lose in terms of the automatic promotion race?
Yeah, it's a really good question that I don't actually know the answer to. I think that I thought that Sheffield United game was a great performance. I think a lot of the other times that Sunderland have played 4-4-2, I've not loved it, to be honest. I think you do lose so much in midfield. And I think that now that he's had the opportunity to rest Chris Rigg, now that Alan Brown's got 60-odd minutes under his belt, and I thought looked canny at Sheffield Wednesday, given how, it was literally his first competitive minutes for 3 months. I'm tempted to think that he probably won't go to 4-4-2. I think it was interesting. I can't remember which game it was, but it was probably about a month, maybe 6 weeks ago now. I asked Lebris about going to 4-4-2. And I asked him about Mayenda and how difficult it was, given how well Mayenda was doing, not picking him in the team. And to be honest, Lebris was like, not really. It's perfect. He's 19. We need players who can make an impact off the bench. And let's be fair as well. We've criticised Lebris at times over the season for not having game-changing subs, and Mayenda is one. He said it's the perfect situation. He's learning from a top championship striker in Wilson Isidor. He's playing, getting minutes. He's changing the game for us, giving us something different. So I'm inclined to think that he'll probably is quite happy with how it is at the moment, where Mayenda starts the odd game, comes off the bench in pretty much every game, and brings some fresh legs from the bench. So I don't have a major issue with that. I think you could bring Rigg back in to start on Saturday, given that he's had a bit of a breather. You could start with Brown. I'm not overly. I wouldn't be furious personally if Mayenda didn't start on Saturday. I can understand why he wants to kind of keep things as stable as he can, and ultimately you do need players who can change the game off the bench. So I don't think we should see it as a snub on Saturday. If the team's dropping Mayenda's on the bench, I think that Lebris argument is a fair one. But you also have two home games in 3-4 days. So why can't you mix it up for one of those games? You know, why can't Isidor rest against Preston and come on after an hour and Mayenda get a start?
I was going to say that. I was going to say that, Phil. After 2 goals, can you drop him for this Cardiff game? I think that's an interesting question as well. What does that say to the squad if he is dropped?
I think you can. I don't think Lebris works in that way. I think he just works. What's the best thing to do for the next game? I don't think he's particularly bothered about upsetting players. I think he'll just, if he thinks it's right to bring Isidor back in and bring Rigg back in or start Brown again, I think he'll just calmly explain his decision, really. And I don't think he'll be too bothered whether it upsets anyone. So the honest answer is I don't know. But if you put me on the spot, I think he'll probably just stick with 4-3-3 for Saturday, I think, and use Mayenda as an impact substitute. But we'll see. Like if he feels that Isidor still could do with another rest, maybe he'll just stick as it is with Mayenda. I think that's the positive. To sort of be a bit more flexible in selection. And I think the nice thing as well, the important thing about getting that result on Friday is it just gives everyone a little bit of breathing space. I think, we should be looking to win every game because the top 2 isn't gone yet. But also I think had you lost on Friday, there would be this sense of, we need to get a result here against Cardiff. And of course, Sunderland do need to win, but it just feels like it's given everyone a little bit of a, it's been a relief for everyone, I think, and that I think strengthens Sunderland's position a lot going into these couple of home games.
I think it's very interesting, isn't it, Phil? Because Sunderland clearly have 2 ways of playing 2 formations that could feasibly work depending on the opposition. But I feel like 4-4-2, although Lebris has played it, it's definitely not his game model, is it? It's something that Sunderland sort of had to do, maybe stumbled upon. It's just it doesn't feel like it's his plan. But yet, it feels like there might be something there, so it's a bit of a strange situation.
Yeah. Well, he was really upfront with that in terms of it was earlier in the season. I can't remember the game. Somebody watching or listening might remember, but the first time he did it, I think it was probably injury enforced, or I can't remember exactly what the reasons were. And he said, and it's just one that sometimes that's how it happens in football. He just looked at it on the pitch and was like, "Yeah, these 2 are pretty good. They're quick, yeah." But I think it's fair to say he prefers it as that. He prefers it as, if the game's a bit stretched or if the game's in the balance and, there's spaces that those 2 can really exploit, then he'll go for it. I think probably the best example I can think of is that Burnley game where it was 0-0. Sunderland had done really well. And then just as the game started to stretch and play started to tire, he brought Mayenda on. He was absolutely fantastic. And of course, as we all know, Sunderland should have won that game, but they missed 2 penalties. So I think in his head, that's the ideal, is that it's something that he can do. It's a real kind of ace up his sleeve. To implement in games at times rather than doing it from the start. But I don't think there's any doubt at all that especially with while Lefebvre's injured, that we will see someone starting a 4-4-2 at some point. I think it's absolutely inevitable. I just don't think we should assume that he's going to change to it anytime soon necessarily.
And again, it was interesting to see Lebris make those 5 changes, wasn't it, coming into Sheffield Wednesday? Obviously, 2 of them were injury enforced, and it always does tickle me a little bit when we've had pundits and fans are like calling for changes and things to be freshened up, and then the team sheet drops at Hillsborough and there's a bit of annoyance. It's sort of like that old adage, isn't it, that please make changes. Oh no, not those ones. But in fairness to them, they worked, and as you touched upon earlier, Phil, he used his bench quite extensively as well. I think with another, was it 5 off the bench as well? Let me just check. 4 off the bench, sorry. Harrison Jones, Isidor, Rigg and Dennis Sirkin. Sunderland starting to use the wider squad a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that was really telling in terms of like bringing on Rigg and Sirkin and Isidor was like, okay, yeah, that's the kind of caliber that we haven't really seen coming off the bench a lot of the time this season. And I thought it made a real impact. I thought Sunderland had a nice. I never we talked about it after the Leeds game with Meckham, didn't we? I never really like bringing another defender on when you defend the lead. But actually, I think what Lebris got right on Friday night was that although Sunderland had another defender on the pitch, he also got a lot more energy in the front third of the pitch. So I didn't feel like, I don't know what you felt there, I didn't feel like someone who just camped in their box hoping for the best, inviting pressure. Like there were times where they did get up the pitch, they used the ball well. Rigg, I thought, had a really nice impact, it was lovely to see him sort of come on in a fresh shape where he was able to impact it really. And I thought you could see he looked bright, he looked sharp, he made good decisions. I thought Harrison Jones did really well as well. That was an unusual in terms of we weren't expecting it, but a good sub. So I think that's massive. And we have got this thing at the moment where obviously Sunderland are looking to win every game so they can try and force them into the top 2, but you also have to be kind of realistic and look at it and say the most likely scenario at the moment is getting into the playoffs. And I think that makes this idea of building your pool of players who are match fit and ready to play all the more important. And although I didn't think it was a particularly good performance on Friday night, you come away from it looking, Romain Mundell, Scott, was it 85 minutes? Alan Brown's got over an hour under his belt. Chris Riggs had a rest. Wilson Isidor's had a rest. You just look at it going, okay, so that wasn't the best performance, but we've ticked a hell of a lot of boxes for what we all see after the whole game needed to happen. So, credit to Lebris, because had he lost, I don't think people would have gone, oh, well, the team. Well, I think he would have got criticism for it. But it was the right thing to do. And luckily, even though, it wasn't a great performance and someone got a lot of luck, it paid off. And I think that is a real benefit for us moving forward.
And congratulations to Harrison Jones as well, because that was his championship debut. He obviously played in the Carabao Cup against Preston North End and started at the Stadium of Light in the FA Cup against Stoke City. But lovely to see that as well. Phil, though, he did come on instead of really Salis Abdul Samed. Am I imagining it, or is he just slowly slipping down the pecking order, or am I looking too much into that? I expected him to come on in that game, and I was quite surprised when he didn't.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I didn't think too much into it at the time. It wasn't until we were doing our reaction video afterwards that you mentioned it, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, I need to immediately think there's something to say about that, and I hadn't really considered it. But I think that as that kind of said on that video, I think the big thing Lebris seems to be looking for, obviously, was sort of to get to know how he operates now, and he seems to want his midfielder in that scenario to bring loads of energy so they can press the opposition and basically try and just disrupt them and get someone up the pitch. And, I think Harrison Jones did that really well. And it was something that, we've previously said, especially in the Leeds game, probably just as a match fitness thing, probably just because of how long he's had on the sidelines, that it's harder for Salis to do. So I think that's probably why that decision was made. I think there is a reality here that Samed played quite a few games and didn't quite look up to it a lot of the time. And I think now that Brown's back, now that although it's going to be a little while now that Lefebvre is going to come into the picture in the middle, hopefully in a few weeks' time, I think that there is a bit of a reality here that Lebris is getting to the point now where he just has to pick the players who can win in the game to a large extent. So I don't think I think we'll see Samed at some point. Like we've got 3 games coming up in a week. I'd be stunned if Samed didn't get some minutes in that. But I do also agree that he's almost like he's had his opportunity to an extent, if you like, hasn't been able to force his way into the starting 11 on merit, which I think is a fair comment to make. And at the moment now it sort of passes to Brown, I think, and to Rigg to an extent as well when he comes back in the team, to make that place their own. So I do think Samed's probably going to have to be limited to the odd substitute appearance. I think that's the reality of that midfield competition at the moment. And when he does get his chance, it will be up to him, hopefully, to make a bigger impact. But I think you're right in that I think the mantle kind of passes to Brown. I think now he's got an opportunity, I think, in particular, to really sort of establish himself.
Well, look, it's a nice problem to have, really, midfielders sitting on the bench, because we look back to last season and Sunderland's midfield 3, I think, of Ekwa, Job and Dan Neil with Rigg sort of floating in and around there were really jaded, weren't they? It's nice to see that there's some options coming back ahead of a potential playoff campaign, possibly even another shot at the automatics. We'll talk about possibly getting into the automatics a little bit later, Phil, but we'll quickly run through what we expect from the Cardiff City game. We'll probably be previewing that game later on this week in terms of the view from the Cardiff end. But from the Sunderland end, Phil, obviously reduced the Bruce, made 5 changes coming into the Sheffield Wednesday game. He deployed Hjelder at left back. That's probably one that we would expect to go back to Sirkin. Rigg might potentially come back in. Another one I was thinking of was potentially Patrick Roberts might be due a rest after playing against Sheffield Wednesday, and then with the Preston game on Tuesday as well. What do you see Lebris doing?
I think obviously we've got this thing. We don't quite know what the severity of Jan Paveda's injury, so hopefully it's nothing serious, but obviously he missed the game, got injured in the training session before the Sheffield Wednesday game. And the reason I mentioned that is what I would have expected had he been fit was him to probably come off the bench on Saturday and then start against Preston, because generally speaking, I think sensibly Sunderland have rested Roberts for the Tuesday night games, haven't they, when we've had a 3-game week, just to try and prevent those hamstring injuries of the past. What we now have the option is obviously, although it's not the strongest position, maybe Rigg could play there and you could bring Alan Brown in. my expectations, I think Saturday will look like a very, very, very familiar Sunderland team, and sort of Serkin back at left back, Neil, Job, probably Riggs centre midfield, Roberts, Mundell and Isidor. So that would be my expectation. I think Tuesday night you might see a little bit more experimenting in terms of whether it's maybe if Paveda's not fit, Rig out to the right, Alan Brown into midfield, or potentially Mayenda as we discussed. So I think my expectation is Saturday will look like a very familiar sort of Sunderland team, and we might see a bit more of a shuffle around for the Tuesday night game. But I think it's a real opportunity this for Sunderland. I think we don't get complacent about home games at the moment, given the way the last sort of 4 or 5 have gone. So we're certainly not underestimating the opposition, but Sunderland have to look at this to say, well, it's a real chance for us to go back to back, and if we do that, who knows? Maybe some other teams will drop points, and you just don't know where you're going to be. So I think it's an exciting couple of games in a way, really, and I really hope the Sunderland sort of go and attack it, because there's an opportunity here just to put themselves back in the hat and just kind of make things interesting.
Well, let's talk about that, Phil, because I feel like we on this show at the Echo and the sort of fan base in general have perhaps convinced ourselves that the automatics is just a bridge too far, that it's not going to happen, that Leeds, Sheffield United are too strong, Burnley seem to be picking up form. Obviously, Burnley have a game in hand on Sunderland as well at the time of recording. But when you look at the table, there is only 6 points between second place and fourth place, Sheffield United and Sunderland, with so much football left to play, and obviously 2 home games coming up at the Stadium of Light Saturday, Tuesday. It's not beyond the realms of possibility from what we've seen in the Championship over the years, which can be a crazy division, that Sunderland could be within 3 or even level with Sheffield United. The other side to that is that, Sunderland could lose both those games and Sheffield United could win. But it doesn't feel as over as maybe we thought it was at one point.
No, I think it's 8 points, isn't it, at Sheffield United, I think.
Oh, is it? Sorry.
Yeah, which is quite significant. No, listen, I think...
No, yes, you're right. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, there's every chance one or both those teams will have a stumble, and what you don't want to be from a Sunderland perspective is to end up still being behind and kind of going, all right, we sort of assumed it was all over and we've really messed up there. So I think definitely, especially with so many games to go, I don't think you have to overthink it. I think you just have to keep, wherever possible, picking your best team and trying to pick up those points. As we discussed, I think last Friday was a little bit different in that I think we could all see it was crying out for a few changes and just to take a few players out. But I think now you can move back into that phase of just trying to win every game. And for me, I think Sunderland probably have to go back to back here. I think when you look at some of the away, obviously we go to Coventry, who are in outstanding form on the Saturday. Am I right in thinking we still got West Brom and Norwich to play away from home as well?
We have.
So I think when you look at that, you're kind of looking at it going, we've probably already slipped up too much at home. That has probably already happened. We can't really afford to keep doing that. So I agree with you in terms of it's definitely not over, but I think that you realistically, I think Sunderland really need to get 6 points if they're serious about that. And then, as you say, who knows what happens with other teams in those games? Maybe you cut the gap and you just never know. But I do feel like I don't think Sunderland can afford to draw or lose home games against teams that, we're not disrespecting them. We're just saying if you're going to finish in the top 2, then you have to win. I think that's where we are now.
Well, I'm a lot less optimistic now. I've realised it's 8 points and not 6.
I feel like Jeff Shreve's telling Ivanovic he can't play in the Champions League final.
That's a lesson to everybody. Do your prep before the podcast, for God's sake. Anyway, let's talk about injuries, Phil. We had a question from Dean Rolling on Facebook. He says, will Liffey return this season? Just give us a bit of an injury wrap as you can. Obviously, you mentioned Paveda earlier as well.
Yeah, Lefebvre will definitely be back before the end of the season, unless he has a setback. But it was 4 to 6 weeks, and it'll be a fortnight on Saturday since he suffered his injury. So, all being well, he could be back. The sort of last games of March. After the international break. More realistically, you're probably looking at sort of early, sort of mid-April. But I think there's every chance that he gets. A few games running into that playoff campaign. So at the moment, we shouldn't have any negativity about Lefebvre in terms of playing an impact at the end of the season. Ballard's obviously going to be a bit tighter in terms of he's got another couple of weeks off the back of that. So with Ballard, hopefully he'll be fit for the playoffs, but it'll also be about how much match fitness he can get before that. Poveda, we don't know yet. Obviously, not a great. He's missed another game. He's just really struggling to get any momentum. Tommy Watson should be back in the squad this weekend. So there's another kind of option for, obviously, I don't think he's going to be starting games straight away, but he can certainly make a bit of an impact off the bench, which helps you manage Mundle's workload. So that's a really big positive. And then you kind of, I think that's your main ones, isn't it? Then it's a case of you kind of like you're sealed. Abdullahi plays like that. Seal, who's just topping up his minutes in the under-21s, really, which I think is sensible until he's needed. Abdullahi still clearly isn't over that groin injury, which is definitely a concern.
I'd be surprised if he makes his debut this season, Phil, for the first team.
It's tricky to say because we just don't know what the extent of this current issue is, but it's looking difficult, isn't it? Because I think for a player who's not played first team football for so long, new division,
and why risk it? Well, if this groin injury isn't that serious, just keep him ticking along until next season, get a pre-season behind him.
It feels difficult for him to come in and impact it at sort of in the championship running in the middle of a promotion battle. So that one does feel a little bit tricky. So we'll have to see on that one. But yeah, I think the situation is improving. Obviously, the Lefay and Ballard ones are gutting, really. But Lefay could have been worse, that's for sure. So fingers crossed, as long as his rehab goes as planned, he'll still be back to sort of get himself up to speed for the playoffs.
Excellent, Phil. Thank you very much for joining me. There's boatloads of content over at the Sunderland Echo website. We'll also have a preview podcast for you later on in the week, and you can join us for the Cardiff game and the Preston game for full match coverage. Phil will be at Liberice's presser as well. So, yeah, lots to go at. Thank you once again for joining us.